So I locked the cats out tonight, which probably isn't going to be a popular decision, but I did because they're distracting. If you're just joining us, welcome. It is Tuesday evening, December 13th, 7 p.m. on the East Coast. Please say hi. Let us know you're here. And by us, I mean me. Let me know you're here, where you're from. Tonight's question is, hey, Deleuze, what's up? Tonight's question is favorite holiday candy. What's your favorite holiday candy? The credit to that question goes to Amanda behind the scenes. Thank you, Amanda. I was drawing a blank. As always, we'll get started just a couple minutes after. Hi, Lynn. Good to see you. So if you're just joining us, welcome. Let us know you're here. Say hi. You can tell us where you're from. Most importantly, what is your favorite holiday candy? Favorite holiday candy is the question tonight. Hey, Dave Raven. Hey, Amy. I'm always so tired at the end of Tuesdays, and I love doing these, and talking is difficult. So we'll just do the best we can. That's all we can do. If you're just joining us, feel free to grab a chair, comfy spot on the sofa. We have drinks at the bar, non-alcoholic, of course. Hi, Amanda, Boston. Williams Sonoma peppermint bark. That is wonderfully specific. I actually just ordered some Williams Sonoma baskets for some people, and it has that in it. Now I wish I'd got one for myself. Lindt chocolate. I'm a 70% dark Lindt chocolate fan. I keep them in the refrigerator at all times. I always have a stash. Angel food candy. Why don't I know what's angel food candy, Amy? Angel food candy? Mints. That's fair. If you're just joining us, we're about to get started, but please say hi. Let us know where you're from. And the question this evening is your favorite holiday candy. So, all right, with that, let's get the housekeeping out of the way so we can get to some questions and a conversation. Turtle candies are awesome. See my grandmother's favorite candy as well, turtles. They're quite delicious for sure. Hey, Matt, good to see you. Oh, there's Eric B. Terry's chocolate orange. I don't think I know that one either. Interesting. All right, let's get some housekeeping out of the way, and then we'll jump into questions and comments and stories, and we'll have a good hour. So if you don't know me, my name is Ethan. I'm a national advocate for the International OCD Foundation. This community conversation is intended to serve as educational content and is not intended to replace therapy. For treatment-related questions, please be sure to work with your local provider or contact a local clinician. The IOCDF is not a crisis hotline. If you're in crisis or you're ever feeling suicidal or unsafe, please go to your local emergency room, call 911 or 988 Suicide and Crisis Hotline, a Lifeline. And you can do that by dialing 988. As always, we want to create a safe space and as kind and respectful as possible for everyone. We're here to support one another. Don't forget that this is being broadcast on several social media platforms and is being recorded. So keep that in mind as you ask questions, and we all share with one another. Matt, peanut butter fudge. Heck yeah, I love peanut butter and chocolate. That's my jam for sure. Beth Carducci, Eric wrote orange flavored chocolate that is in segments like an orange. Oh. And Matt B is familiar with it. Terry's chocolate orange is an English delicacy. Eric, I didn't know you were so refined. English delicacy. I like it. Okay. Well, how's everyone doing? Let's see. We had Thanksgiving. We're coming up on the holidays, Hanukkah, Christmas, Kwanzaa, and whatever you may celebrate around this time, if you observe. So how is everyone doing? I know we had a town hall last week, and that was on navigating the holidays with around OCD and anxiety. If you were there, and I hope you enjoyed it. But fill me in for a bit. Let me know how everyone is doing. Let me know how you're doing, what you're up to for the holidays, concerns, fears, excitement, things you're celebrating or looking forward to but nervous about. Just looking something up real quick. think, okay. Sorry about that. Oh, good. Questions coming in. I saw, Amy, I'm actually not familiar with Jeff Schwartz's Four Steps. Um, but I know, if I remember correctly, he is the author of Brain Lock. So two of those steps, I'm not super familiar, but from what I understand, two of those steps are good. The other two, not so much. He addresses the obsessions, but not the compulsions in the book Brain Lock. So it's actually not a very good book for OCD specifically. Um, but I'm not intimately familiar with his four steps or the intricacies of that book, just from what I've heard from other clinicians. So I can't speak specifically, Amy, um, to that. But if you have other questions about managing anxiety or OCD, I'm happy to answer for sure. But I haven't read Brainlock in I think I 11 or 12 years old. I don't remember any of it. Um, Carol wrote, Ethan, for some reason I don't get the notification that you're on. Any idea? Are you, Carol, are you, I would imagine you're subscribed and liked and followed. Looks like you're on Facebook. Yeah, if you've liked, subscribed, and followed the IOCDF, you should get the notification. Perhaps somewhere in your settings you have notifications turned off. Maybe I'm not sure why, other than why you wouldn't get that other than that. But we can definitely investigate further, Carol, and try and get you some answers. Sydney wrote, "Hey Ethan, I've been doing great with ERP and have stopped most of my compulsions. However, my overall anxiety and PTSD is worsened. What are your thoughts on this?" Great question. 7 to 5 p.m. And thank you, Amanda. We're checking on Carol on your question, making sure, Carol, that everything is working properly on our end for being notified. Okay, let's see here. Okay, so it's 7:05 p.m. Sydney. So, well, first of all, I'm excited to hear that that your OCD is sort of, waning, and you feel like you've stopped engaging in compulsions. Overall anxiety and PTSD is worsened. What are your thoughts on this? I do have thoughts. I'm obviously not a clinician, so I can only speak from personal experience. But there's a couple different thoughts. One is, any type of trauma and anxiety isn't directly necessarily associated, obviously, with OCD. So anything that you may be going through, or trauma that you haven't necessarily processed or have PTSD around, can absolutely um, become exacerbated for a variety of reasons and triggers. Just because you've dealt with the OCD in a meaningful way doesn't necessarily mean that your PTSD or overall anxiety will improve. It makes sense that your anxiety is worse, especially if you're having a significant amount of PTSD. Um, Generally, in different people, sometimes the OCD can be influencing the trauma and the PTSD, and vice versa, right? Um, in this case, your anxiety and your PTSD uh, might be worse because you're having more anxiety. Well, let me rephrase that. I'm doing great with ERP and have stopped most of my compulsions. So I guess my follow-up question, Sydney, would be, um, do you feel like you're working hard to resist compulsions? Is it causing you a lot of anxiety still to not engage in the compulsions, or are the compulsions much more under control? And for the most part, you may have the thoughts, but you don't feel as pushed to engage in compulsions, and don't necessarily feel as anxious when you have the desire to compulse. And I'm asking that because I'm wondering if you're sort of resisting from a white knuckling perspective. That can definitely increase anxiety. But the PTSD piece of it, a lot of times trauma has to be managed separately and tweezed out from the OCD. They can definitely be intertwined in really complicated ways. And so you're definitely not alone. That is not uncommon at all to hear that. It's similar to OCD and addiction, right? And when OCD is treated, addiction gets worse. When addiction is treated, OCD gets worse. And I know it can be discouraging to have that sort of back and forth and feel like you have one under control and then the other one pops up. So I definitely think that hopefully you're seeing someone that is a specialist in PTSD and trauma. There are some modalities of treatment that are beneficial for both. Dialectical behavioral therapy, or DBT, is really effective for PTSD, as well as OCD. It's not indicated for the treatment of OCD, but mindfulness and emotional regulation and all of that is just really beneficial in general for your life, let alone for OCD and things like that. But for PTSD, there's other modalities of treatment that are really effective. So If your current OCD therapist or treatment provider can also treat your trauma and PTSD, that would be amazing. And that's something you can now focus on. I would try to reframe too and look at it like, okay, now my OCD is under the control. And instead of, being upset, which is valid, about the anxiety and PTSD, look at it, this is an opportunity to now be able to address the PTSD without OCD getting in the way, if that makes sense. I like how I hemmed and hawed for the first 4 minutes of that question until I got in the rhythm of the conversation. But hopefully, Sydney, that was helpful. And feel free to elaborate or ask additional questions as follow-ups if you want to give me more information. Kayla, I'm doing great this season. Thank you for asking. I really appreciate that. And you're getting your Erica wrote, we are getting both my kiddos baptized this coming Sunday. I hope you have a wonderful and meaningful Sunday. That sounds wonderful. Eric B wrote, I'm familiar with Schwartz's method. It's an older method that helped me early on in my treatment, but was limited, kind of like a combo and ERP act before either was well established. Gotcha. Yeah, the brain lock. I feel bad speaking to it because I just know that it's not spoken well of within the clinician OCD circles. And if I remember correctly, it has something to do with, like, it addresses the obsessions, but not the compulsion piece of it. So, your reframe, it's mostly cognitive and not behavioral, I think is the gist of that. So, let's see here. Duluth wrote, I kind of like the idea of, quote, the feelings cannot kill you, but running from those feelings can. I like that. Who said that? Did I say that? Maybe I said that. If I said that, go me, pat on the back. But curious, I like that. Hello, Sarah. It's good to see you. Nikki Bradley in Dublin. Duluth at 7:09 p.m. wrote, I'm still searching for that stability in my life as cycles of depression, OCD, and mania are keeping me on my toes. I wonder if it's because I'm teaching my brain that certain feelings are intolerable. It's a great question, and it's a great statement, honestly. And, I think that we have to look at this journey, whether it's OCD or depression or mania or hypomania or bipolar, or whatever it is, is all of these disorders and diseases have seasons. And if you're engaging in maintenance or management or treatment, they're going to, for lack of a better word, erupt at different times based on different things. Good stress brings up my OCD, bad stress brings up my OCD, and sometimes it doesn't. I don't know that there's a rhyme or reason, though we can, of course, identify patterns in our behavior or patterns in our life, and then be able to say, oh, in times of the past when I've done this, then my OCD, my anxiety, and my depression, my whatever has gotten worse. I think one of the things that I do in my own experience with OCD, and even with my bipolar to a certain extent, and my emotions, is that, I tend to judge and assign meaning to when something is spiking or getting a little bit more or less tolerable, instead of sort of, and really looking to identify, oh, well, what's the reason and why is this happening to me and what did I do wrong? And, really sort of going down a rabbit hole of what I've changed. I think it is important to identify your triggers, but I think your triggers, generally I think I know my triggers pretty quickly on. And I think I can definitely get stuck in a rabbit hole, in a loop of trying to determine very detailedly what the cause is and how I can change it. But sometimes cigar is just a cigar. And sometimes, that is just the behavior of the disorder. And it's not because you're doing anything right or wrong. And so I think we have to give ourselves a lot of compassion for when whatever we're experiencing on a mental illness level, specifically OCD, flares up, and be like, yeah, this is what it does. Maybe it's very clear to me why it's happening right now. Maybe it isn't, but the reason isn't necessarily the solution, right? Especially around OCD. Around OCD, you can be triggered, but the trigger isn't necessarily something that you should stop or avoid to stop the OCD. It's really the acceptance of uncertainty, engaging your skills and tools. Those are the things that you want to do to address the OCD. So I think that, the first part of it is try to stop being surprised when you're sort of tossed on the roller coaster. You don't live your life this way all the time, but at a certain point, I kind of just expected that I would be pushed on the roller coaster at various times through the day. And when I did, I was like, yeah, figured that would happen. And then what do you do about it? Well, let's recognize that we're on the roller coaster and step back off, no matter how hard it is. The part you wrote, Duluth, about, I'm teaching my brain that certain feelings are intolerable. That's valid, right? So, like, the more we reinforce the fear and the idea that a specific thought is challenging, and I mean, compulsions reinforce that, right? The OCD is the monster, and it's screaming, if you don't do this, then blah. And so you do that. And every time you do that, you tell the monster that they're right. And I'm going to keep doing that. And so you reinforce it, right? And when you don't compulse and you embrace the fear or the feelings and the ick, you're basically telling the monster, yeah, I don't care, let it happen. And the monster doesn't really, I haven't said this in a while, but I love this analogy. It's not anything, it's not my analogy, but it's simply put, OCD is a bully. OCD is a bully. So if we think back to middle school, I was bullied in middle school. I was overweight and I was bullied. And if we think about this for a minute, I got called nicknames, mean names, every day by the same person. Scott Susan, if you're watching, you're an ass, but I forgive you, but not really. Anyway, so, the bully is saying something to get a specific response, right? So if a bully is bullying you and saying X, Y, and Z, and you're crying and being upset and arguing, no, I'm not that, then what is the bully going to do? The bully's going to keep bullying because he's getting the response. They're getting the response that they want, right? But if my bully walked into the cafeteria and before he opened his mouth, I said, I am so fat. I'm the fattest, and I'm gonna sit on your face, and I'm gonna sit on your mom's face, and I'm gonna sit on everybody, and I'm gonna like they're not gonna be able to breathe because I'm just so fat, and I'm gonna go eat now and like just be like the fattest person in the world, and so you can't do anything about it. I've now taken away all his power. He has nothing to say to me because not only have I already said what he was going to say, but like I'm cool with it. I'm good. I'm good with it. So OCD responds the exact same way. When we agree with it, when we're like, yep, yep, that's going to happen. Totally, absolutely. Yep, all good with that. Right? We're taking that bully's power away from it. So in essence, by doing that, you're not reinforcing the belief that the thought is terrifying. You're in fact acknowledging that I don't really care what the thought is. The thought is a thought. And, you want me to be afraid of that you're a monster, but really I'm going to recognize you for what you are and take your power away. And so you stop reinforcing that thought, which stops reinforcing that feeling, which then alleviates, and that feeling, that thought start to dwindle. So I love that analogy. I remember when I first heard it, that really helped clarify for me sort of how OCD behaves and how you have to approach exposure and response prevention, the gold standard for treatment for OCD. And it was very clear to me. It's like, okay, I have to take the bully's power away by beating the bully to the punch. And then if I can do that every time, the bully is going to stop bullying me. And that's exactly what OCD does, right? That's what ERP is. Like, yeah, sure, maybe not. I don't know. I agree with you. I'm not going to do that. Let's just let it happen. Bring it. I'm going to be uncomfortable. And over time, right, that noise and that static starts to get quieter and quieter and quieter. But thank you for sharing, Deleuze. I appreciate that. Sydney wrote, I have thoughts, but don't feel as anxious about not engaging. Okay, that's good. So, that's totally normal. Sydney was talking that she had her compulsions much more under control. It's we can't control our thoughts. We're going to have OCD thoughts, sometimes worse, sometimes better. It's really how we respond to them, the compulsions that are important. So in that case, it's not uncommon to sort of get one diagnosis out of the way. And then it's not that your PTSD perhaps has gotten worse. It's that that's now sort of what's left. Like that's the aftermath. So we've dealt with OCD, and now PTSD and anxiety and panic are now really prevalent. So kind of lean on what I said before, which is, definitely engage in treatment and treatment modalities. PTSD is extremely treatable. So is panic. And, they can determine and squeeze out whether it's related to the OCD or not related to the OCD. But I try not to be discouraged by it's like, oh, I got this one thing out of the way. And now there's these two other things. And I say that because I from my own experiences, understand what that's like, having, had OCD and then throughout period of time being diagnosed with other things and going, oh my God, now I have to deal with this. Now I have to deal with this. Let me be very clear about something is, I think diagnoses are important for treatment, but that's it. That's where it stops. I don't care if you have 10 diagnoses. I know we can sit here and really stigmatize ourselves. I have this, I have that, I have this, I have that. All of this, I'm going to make an assumption, and I'm going to say that everyone in this room all have the same goal. We all want to live a full, meaningful, value-driven life. That is our goal. And if you disagree, feel free to let me know. Don't speak for me, and I'll apologize. But I'm going to assume that's what we want. And if that's all what we want, then we all share the same goal, regardless of what we're diagnosed with. And so I would argue that a diagnosis is important for treatment, but beyond that, the question I ask myself is, how do I live a meaningful life? Teach me how to do that, right? And once I learn the skills and tools to do that, I'm off. Doesn't mean I'm successful every day, but my point is I don't care what I'm diagnosed with in terms of mental illness. I just want to, or my mental health, I just want to live a full life. So, when I was diagnosed with panic or anxiety disorder and finally bipolar, I really stigmatized myself, but then it dawned on me this fact that that doesn't change what I want out of my life. It just changes potentially how I go about getting it. Um, Learning new skills, learning new tools, whether it requires medication or not, but it didn't change who I was as a person and what I desired. And so, I think we can really get stuck on these labels of diagnosis and really let it beat us down. And I would argue that try not to let that happen to you, because at the end of the day, it is what it is. And I'm not saying it doesn't suck, and I'm not saying it doesn't feel good or feel bad, because it does all of those things. But we all want the same thing, and your goal and your desire moving forward doesn't change. Just how you approach it changes. So just something to keep in mind. Deleuze at 7:10 p.m. wrote, Ethan, have you practiced large amounts of meditation, or has it really been a part of your recovery? I'm trying to incorporate it into my recovery. So meditation has been really important in my recovery. It's important to note that meditation is a skill, right? It's not a treatment. But for me, grounding myself so I can engage in the treatments, becoming more present, and just like scheduling self-care and time for myself every day throughout the day. Meditation can take 5 minutes, but taking those moments, even just once a day, in the morning, at night, whenever, in the middle of the afternoon, is really, really helpful for a myriad of reasons. And I actually really look forward to, the times that I can take to myself and even just quietly sit and be there with my thoughts and be present. And so, yeah, I rely on it heavily, but I don't rely on it to relax. And I think that's important. Like, we don't want to meditate to get rid of or feel better, right? It's all about being present and existing with who we are and how we feel in that moment. And that's really what it's about, to just exist presently, however you are, without judgment. And so, meditation can become a compulsion, if every time you feel uncomfortable or anxious, you move to it, to not have that feeling. But meditation in regards to anxiety can be really helpful, especially, if you're stuck sort of in the future and the present, worrying and building yourself up, kind of taking that breath and coming back to the present and sort of just helping yourself stabilize and realize where you are in this moment and what's happening right now without judgment is really, really helpful, and just a wonderful practice all around, I think. And I know you all know this, but meditation is really effective in life regardless. And so are all these modalities of treatment, by the way. I think they're really helpful in life, regardless of whether you have OCD or any other mental health condition or not. So this is a great question at 7:10 p.m. I'm going to take a drink real quick. Gandix asks, hey, Ethan, what are your thoughts on radical acceptance when it comes to OCD? So I love this question. I think radical acceptance is one of the keys to unlocking OCD treatment and recovery. That's how strongly I feel about radical acceptance. I think that when you're mired in OCD and compulsions and obsessions, and you're first learning about treatment or engaging in treatment or in the midst of treatment, I think it requires a significant amount of radical acceptance, because our brains are telling us one thing and our brains are not correct, right? It's a miswiring, a misfiring in our brains. It's really scary to not trust your own brain. We're all smart, talented, good-looking people. So it's really hard to take someone's word for it, even if they've gone through it. For me, I'm sitting here saying, oh, this works. But you're sitting there going like, I don't know, because this feels really real and this thought is really scary. And if it's really scary and it feels real, I don't necessarily trust what you're saying. Maybe my situation is different. Maybe my situation, it's the first time that it's ever been different and mine isn't the same as yours. I think that all requires radical faith, whether it's a clinician, whether it's me saying, take the leap, take the chance. It's terrifying to leap and not being able to see where you're going to land. We're all here saying, if you take the leap and you surrender to this process, you will land in a beautiful, a beautiful, safe place where you can move forward with your life. But that's generally not enough for somebody just to say it. We want to see it. We want to be able to see exactly where we're going to go. I think radical acceptance is what we have to do to take that leap. And radical acceptance isn't necessarily a feeling that you accept it. It's this, I'm going to close my eyes and jump. I don't know whether I believe it or not, but everybody's saying it. So, screw it. I'm going to, the first time you cliff jumped or went off the high dive or went down that scary water slide, things might have happened, but you kind of were just like, I don't know if I'm going to come out of this on the other end, but I'm going to take the shot because other people are. So I'm just going to screw it. Close my eyes. I'm going to do it. And so those are my thoughts on radical acceptance. Radical acceptance was a huge motivator and crucial tool in my own recovery and remains so when I'm really struggling or finding, in a period of life that I find harder than usual. You just kind of go for it, trusting the process, trusting the people that you're surrounded by, trusting the community and engaging. So great. That's a great question. It's probably one of my favorite questions. I like that question. So thank you, Gandix. I appreciate it. Deleuze wrote, yes, I feel that if you act with great desperation and resentment when you experience certain difficult emotions, white knuckling it, your brain will keep sending out anxiety habitually when you have. Exactly, for sure. Gandix at 7:12 p.m. wrote, can compulsions themselves also cause immense anxiety? Also relating to PTSD, it feels like there's no compulsion that is correct, so it causes distress. I mean, this definitely gets into some existential things. I mean, the reality of it is OCD, compulsions, engaging, treatment, it can all, anything to a certain extent can cause trauma. I have PTSD specifically related to the incorrect treatment of my OCD. So, I think that, and I know lots of people that engaged in compulsions that's really in places or circumstances or whatever that is now really triggering for them to go there, go near them, think about those things and have elements of PTSD and trauma around that. So, I definitely think the short answer is yes. Can compulsions themselves also cause immense anxiety? Oh, sorry, I missed also relating this. I missed the main thing. Of course. I mean, the compulsion at first works. That's why we do it, right? You have the thought, you have the feeling, okay, I need to do this one thing, and you do it and you feel better. That's why we keep doing it. But as you continue to do it, the reward from the compulsion decreases. So, and that's why, if you remember the first time you may have compulsed, you did it once, you were like, okay, yeah, I feel better. And, if you're really struggling, you went from washing your hands 3 times a day to 500 times a day, or checking or asking for reassurance or reviewing in your mind. What started out as something small grew. And that's because the reassurance that you receive from the compulsion starts to dwindle. And to a point where, in fact, you don't get the relief from the compulsion at all, which is a place where I got to, where I was just compulsing all the time and I didn't even get the relief, but I didn't know anything else to do. So, obviously, feeling like you have to engage in the compulsion is very anxiety provoking. I mean, that's why we avoid, we don't want to have to go through the anxiety of then, oh, if I do this, I'm going to get triggered and then I'm going to have to fight and then I'm probably going to be compulsing and then I'm going to get stuck in that compulsion and that's going to, I don't want to deal with that. So I'm not going to do that. Right. So even the compulsions themselves can absolutely cause anxiety, even though they're meant to relieve the anxiety. So yes, to all the above. Let's see. Let's scroll around. Good talk on I don't like when this shifts. Good talk on brain lock in the book. And it was one I remember. It was one of the first OCD books that ever came out in the mid 90s, I think, or something like that. And at that time, it was, I think, a breakthrough. But I think what they learned. My point is, it only looked at the cognitive and the psychology of it and didn't address the behavioral aspect of OCD, which obviously is a massive part. Just to pick up on Gandix at 7:15, yeah, I feel like I'm not as surprised by OCD as I used to be, but I also address potential bipolar via meds, so I'm feeling more stable, which I guess helps. That's awesome. I found meds were really helpful for bipolar. And people have different experiences with that in OCD, but I think our emotions are very closely tied to our obsessions. And I think being able to navigate emotions with more objectivity and insight directly impacts my OCD as well. So although they're not directly, bipolar is not considered a a related disorder. It's its own thing, but definitely they feed on each other and overlap whatever is going on. So I found that the overall management of my emotions and the skills and tools that I've learned to manage my emotions has significantly impacted the way I manage my OCD as well. So that makes a lot of sense. Um, let's see here. Deleuze at 716. How do you keep your willingness high on a consistent basis? Is that even possible when it comes to this work? I feel like it just has to be built out over time and doesn't come easily. Great question. So I don't know that it's possible to keep your willingness or even motivation high on a consistent basis. Um, if that's the case, I think that'd be wonderful and make the process a lot easier. I think the reality of it is just like moods. When you're going through the process, there's some days where you're going to feel like fighting, and some days where you're like, screw this. This is hard. This sucks. This doesn't feel good. All of the above, right? I think what we have to keep consistent is the action and the openness to action. So, if we're talking to somebody who's significantly depressed and not motivated, it doesn't mean that they shouldn't engage in any of these treatments. It just means that they're going to engage while they feel like shit, right? So that's really what we're talking about. So the treatment for depression is behavioral activation. We're going to get up and do it anyway and just feel like crap doing it. I mean, that's not the only treatment. There's lots of treatments that I'm not familiar with, but that is one of them. And it's also for OCD. So I think holding your values close, understanding what you're losing by engaging in OCD and compulsions, keeping your goals right in front of you, all of those things really help to maintain willingness to change and willingness to engage in hard things and remember the things and remembering the things that you care about and want to do, dreams, goals, all of those things. But the reality is, just like joy and happiness, it's not our default emotion. And so the likelihood of maintaining a high level of feeling of willingness and excitement to engage in these things isn't realistic, right? So then what do? Well, you engage in them regardless how you feel. So obviously willingness makes it easier. At the end of the day, it's the surrender to the uncertainty that's kind of the most important thing. So it can definitely be harder to engage when you feel crappy or scared or any of those things. But you have to ask yourself the question, am I physically able to resist this compulsion and do this thing despite how I feel? And most 99.9% of the time, you may feel like you can't, but physically you are able. It is just a choice. So, you know, it does get easier over time for sure. And also the OCD wanes over time. So you don't have to work as hard. And that's another big thing is recognizing, I think when you're in the midst of it, how hard you're fighting your OCD. You feel like, oh my God, I can't do this for the rest of my life. This is exhausting. And the reality of it is as your OCD subsides, and I'm sure many of you can attest to this, you don't have to work as hard. And also your skills and tools become second nature. And so it becomes a lot easier to address them in meaningful and helpful ways. But so my suggestion is when it comes to feelings in OCD, your feelings are absolutely valid and feelings are very important in a variety of things in our life. When it comes to OCD, feelings can be very deceptive. Um, and we don't want to necessarily put a lot of weight into our feelings in regards to the OCD. Uh, you know, whether the feeling backs up the thought. In other words, well, if I feel it, then the thought must be true, or you just have a crappy feeling altogether. We can recognize the feeling, we can make space for the feeling, we can think the feeling is valid, but the feeling should not dictate your action. At the end of the day, we can move forward regardless of how we feel. And I think that's the biggest takeaway is don't let your feelings either dictate how you move through navigating OCD. And most importantly, don't let your feelings dictate how you judge isn't the right word, but how you determine whether you're making progress in learning how to manage your OCD. I think for lots of people that I've talked to, including myself, it's hard to recognize the wins that you're making in treatment. And you feel worse before you feel better. And it can take time. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And so it's very easy for us after 2 weeks of treatment or 3 weeks of treatment or a month of treatment to say, I still feel like shit, I must not be getting better. When in reality, maybe you went into treatment not being able to dress, shower, brush your teeth, brush your hair, and a month later, you're doing all of those things. But because those are things that normal people do, you don't even notice that as a win. It's like, well, I should be doing that by default. It's like, no, you shouldn't. Stop being so judgy with yourself. Never compare what other people can do and what you can do, right? So notice little wins and don't let the feelings, don't read into the feelings. I'm not saying this right, but don't base your success in treatment on how you feel, because they don't move in the same direction. They will lie to you. Thank you, Chris. I'm so glad you like these. Eric wrote, I got too hung up on my 4 diagnosis for a while, and I'm now focusing more on happiness and progress at 7:21 p.m. Thank you for that. I agree. Erica wrote, having an unusual at 7:22 p.m., having an unusual amount of one-off traumatic events in my life, see PTSD, and OCD makes the possibility of if feel more likely, but I found that I'm no longer willing to surrender my life to fear on the off chance that those random once in a lifetime traumas might happen again. I'm willing to take the chance and have a value-driven life and live in my head forever. I mean, what I should just end the stream. What else is there to say? And that speaks to not only, a lot of individuals that have real event OCD that say, well, I am a bad person, or, I can't do that because what if that happens again? It did happen. I think this is beautifully said, which is, you can live in anticipation. And woo, that was new. Anticipation. You can live. Katie's probably laughing if she's watching. You can live in anticipation, trying to prevent and gain certainty around keeping something from happening. But OCD is a trickster, and OCD will create the reality that you're afraid of. If you're afraid of going outside and getting sick and dying, then you at some point end up in bed never leaving because you're afraid you're going to go outside and get sick. But what happens if you get sick? You end up in bed never leaving. And so many times OCD creates the reality that you're afraid of. So we're going to take a chance. We're going to take a shot. And you know what? If it happens, it happens. It's unlikely. It's not impossible, but it's unlikely. But, I always say to Katie, and I always think this to myself, like, wouldn't it be awful to be 80, 90, 100 years old and look back and go, oh my gosh, it never happened. I protected myself from that thing that I feared for 50 years and it never happened. That's all kinds of regret that I don't want to face, right? I would rather look back and go, I tried and I lived and I had a good life. And yeah, there was this time and that time that may or may not have happened, but don't look back at your life and go, oh, I protected myself from something that I even had no idea if it would happen or not. So I love this comment. I almost want to screen cap it and save it. Well said, Erica. Thank you for this. I think a lot of people here got a lot of insight and hopefully some encouragement off that comment. So I appreciate you. The next perfect comment to follow it is Rayken at 7:23 p.m. This is also true. I love you guys. This shit sucks. So see, both comments equally powerful and equally accurate. So thank you for that. Gib Gob, I like that name, Gib Gob. At 7:24 p.m. How to date with severe OCD? Great question. So don't. And I'm being serious. The reality of it is if you're having severe OCD, I don't think there are times where you should put your life on hold to navigate and better understand and get treated for something. Acceptance, commitment therapy, and other modalities of treatment all talk about like there's not a perfect time to do anything. We should all try different things at the same time. But, the question we have to ask ourselves is how meaningful can you date or meet a significant other, navigating OCD if you're either not in treatment or just starting treatment, and you're using the word severe. So I'm assuming that the obsessions and compulsions are taking up a significant amount of your time in life. which means how much time do you have devoted to your values and how much of a meaningful relationship can you have with someone, right? So I think, you know, the desire to have our cake and eat it too when we have OCD is really, really high. I want to figure this out. I don't want to deal with treatment that's kind of scary, or I don't believe I can be treated. I want to protect my OCD, and so I'm going to figure out a way to live life and navigate the OCD at the same time. I wholeheartedly disagree with that. I think that everyone can be treated. Everybody can live a beautiful, full life. I think that if you're navigating really intense OCD and you're at a place where it's consuming a significant amount of hours in your life, um, I seek treatment and focus on yourself before you started focusing. You can't be there for someone else in the way that you would want to be when OCD is literally the main relationship in your life. So, my this is my personal opinion. You can agree or disagree, and however you feel. I think you need to work on yourself, whether you're talking about yourself or someone else. I'm not inferring, but if someone came to me and said, "I'm really having struggle with OCD, and I met someone, what should I do?" Get yourself in a good place first, so you can be there in the way that you yourself, not your OCD, would want to be there for that relationship. Alex at 7:25 p.m. wrote, "What are your thoughts on why treatment is so inaccessible and expensive? How do we fix this?" This is a stream, Alex. It's a great question. It's inaccessible for a variety of the healthcare system, of course, itself is pretty broken. The second part of that is mental health has always been seen as a secondary issue to physical health when the brain is an organ, and it's no different, right? So we have the stigma of oh, well, anxiety isn't a thing, it's just willpower, just get up and do it, stop worrying yourself. So you have that stigma, and then you have the undertrained psychologists and therapists that actually treat OCD with exposure with evidence-based treatments, exposure and response prevention, and acceptance commitment therapy. And so you have this huge demand from us and everyone else, and then you have this very small supply. So and that's because they don't teach OCD really. You have like a half day of abnormal psych in grad school, from what I've heard. So you don't really learn what OCD is. Then you graduate, you get your licensure, and unless you specialize, you went to you did your hours and your internship at a clinic that specialized in OCD, you probably leave and get your therapy license thinking that you can treat OCD. And so, you wind up like so many of us seeing therapist after therapist doing the wrong thing before you actually find the right treatment, if you find the right treatment. So that's why it's inaccessible. And that's why it's expensive, is because, there's way more of us than there are of treatment providers. And also insurance companies don't properly reimburse therapists what they should reasonably get reimbursed. So it's also an insurance problem. I know it's very easy to blame the therapist and be like, well, why don't they charge too much, and that's BS, and why don't they take insurance? And well, what it takes to get specialized in OCD is really expensive. So, yes, if you're charging $1,000 or $850 or $600, for 50 minutes, that's probably overkill. But, I know 150, 200, 250 can seem like a lot, but the reality is this insurance company should be reimbursing providers. That's the reality, right? So then we have to talk to insurance companies to educate them. And, NoCD has done an amazing job of showing showing insurance companies that, well, NoCD is an app. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's a teletherapy app specific for OCD. And they've done an amazing job of showing insurance companies that OCD is extremely pervasive, underdiagnosed, and costs the healthcare system quite a bit of money. In fact, little known fact, it's one of the top 10 reasons people go on disability. Affects 1 in 40. So it's a big question. And those are some of the reasons. How do we fix this is what we're sort of all doing, and what the IOCDF is working so hard. You fix it through education of therapists, legislation, insurance companies, and most of all, advocacy, reducing stigma reduction, helping people understand what the heck OCD actually is, not what they think it is. All of these things have to work in conjunction to sort of create a world where we can go to the doctor, get a diagnosis, and go see a specialist that's covered by insurance, and we get treated just like you would If you had heart palpitations and you went to the doctor and they said, "Oh, I'm gonna write you a prescription to see a cardiologist. Here you go. Here's 12 names," and you go, and your insurance company covers it most of the time. That's the goal, and I definitely think we're making progress toward that. The IOCDF is working extremely hard, along with other nonprofits around the world, and amazing advocates and influencers, and so many people that care about this community, and all of you. So, but those are just some quick bullet points as to why treatment is expensive. It's inaccessible, but it is more accessible than it's been, and we're doing everything we can to fix it. And I just think it's going to take time. In the meantime, though. There's some good I have some good articles, but there's some good insight on navigating the insurance companies, things that you can do to try to get coverage, and things like that. In fact, we talked about doing a couple live streams on those. I'm going to give my email address out at the end of this. Anybody can email me, but when I give it out, Alex, feel free to follow up, and I can hopefully give you some ideas and resources that may help you and anyone else having trouble navigating the system, some opportunities to potentially access treatment, hopefully. So feel free to email me. But great question, Alex. Thank you. Yeah, Merle wrote, when it comes to dating with OCD, also the difference between having an OCD obsession with someone or being into them romantically. That's right. It can really just, it just muddies. It muddies. And while there may not be a perfect time to engage in anything, we're going to give ourselves the best opportunity to be there for ourselves and others. Amanda, lots of questions tonight. Thank you so much for your engagement. I'm sorry I'm behind. Okay, I just lost my place because I scrolled down to see where I was missing. So Amanda wrote, here we are. I noticed that when I'm doing an exposure, my mind engages in a device of some kind of distract me from my anxiety. Is that a mental compulsion? How can I habituate if my mind won't let me? Great question. So I think that's super common. I think that that's the defense mechanism is like, I don't want to feel this anxiety. I'm going to try to think of other things. It's not necessarily a mental compulsion. I don't know that I can answer that. If there's a conscious decision to not stay in the moment with the anxiety and turn away from it mentally over and over again, that may be a compulsion. That may also just be your coping mechanism. I don't even know that it is a compulsion. That just be maybe how you deal with anxiety. For me, being able to stay with the anxiety is almost like meditation, right? I wouldn't try to penalize yourself for the amount of times you're distracted. I would try to come back to the anxiety as much as possible when you're engaged in exposure. So if you get triggered, so let's say, I'm terrified to touch the table because I'm gonna contaminate my hand and then something's gonna happen. So I'm gonna touch the table and then I'm gonna experience this wave of anxiety. And then, oh my God, all these fears are and then if your mind wanders off to something else and you notice that wander, come back. Okay, no, this is what's going to happen. All these things, it's going to be scary. It's going to be awful. And it's going to want, and how many times can you come back? I think we can get in the weeds as to whether it's a compulsion or not. And candidly, I don't know. But we can't control our thoughts. They're involuntary. And we can't control our feelings, but we can control our focus. So what we're really talking about is changing focus. Like, if I check in with my mind, there's a billion thoughts flying by, but we're having this conversation. I'm focusing my thoughts so you and I can have this conversation. I can talk on this subject. So that's the other piece is we can't control our focus and therefore our behavior. So there's two components, right? Thoughts and emotions, thoughts and feelings can't control. They are involuntary and they loud and annoying and they do their thing. And then focus and behavior are the things that we can control. So obsession, thought activates feeling, anxiety. So then you have the choice to compulse or resist the compulsion. And if you're engaging in exposure and response prevention, right, then I'm going to resist and dive back into these feelings and thoughts and let them be there and accept them and try not to distract myself away from them. And if I catch myself doing that, just come back to the moment, keep touching, keep triggering, and so forth, if that makes sense. No, Katie, that does not mean that I'm open to cliff jumping on our honeymoon, 7:26 p.m. I think she's referring to radical faith. Um, yeah, we were looking at YouTube videos on our places we were going on our honeymoon, and they had underwater cave diving where you have to hold your breath for 45 seconds in between air pockets. And I'm like, nope. She's like, let's go, let's do this. I'm like, no, no. Radical faith only around OCD, not underwater cave diving. Like, I don't swim, and caves are claustrophobic. So I feel like if we put those two together, it's a recipe for a really bad lasagna. Gib Gob said, but if someone has OCD, how can they enjoy dating someone and being focused on the date? Exactly. 727. That's right. That's exactly. Oh, or are you? Oh, you're not trying. You're asking me. I'm not saying. So I have OCD, right? But I can have a meaningful relationship with my fiance because it's not dictating my actions. It's not ruling my brain. It's whispers, if anything, right? So it doesn't mean that I'm cured. There's no cure. It's chronic, but that isn't a death sentence. I feel like I'm cured because I wasn't able to function at all before. And now I have a pretty amazing life that I'm extremely grateful and blessed to have. So it's not so much you can't date if you have OCD, right? Let's make a comparison for this. You're dealing with stage 4 lung cancer and you are undergoing ungodly treatment. And there is a 50% chance that you will survive, maybe stage 3, but whatever, you get the idea, right? And you're having chemo and you're throwing up and you feel exhausted. Probably not a good time to start dating. I mean, I don't know if you're like, oh, let me jump on Tinder and see. No, right? And it seems kind of ridiculous. Like, no, I wouldn't. It's the same thing. If you're in the midst of awful OCD, where your decisions and your life is just consumed with compulsions, right? It's just not a good time to date. It doesn't mean that you can't date as an individual with OCD, either diagnosed or even that's spite. It doesn't mean I break up with Katie when I'm struggling. You know, you can absolutely enjoy, and that's the whole point, is getting your OCD in a place of management and maintenance so you can engage in your values and be present minded and be there with your person. And if you're already seeing someone or you're already with someone and you're already in a relationship, they can also become part of that process. And I encourage, if you're in that situation, to bring them to therapy, work with a clinician and things like that. So I think it's very easy when you're really hit with OCD hard for the first time or in the midst of a struggle. How can I enjoy dating and being the focus when OCD is literally consuming my life? And you could replace dating with anything. How can I do X with OCD? So the point is, connect with a provider, clinician, treatment, engage in treatment, and try to get yourself to a place of understanding of OCD and maintenance and management. And I started dating. I don't know. You may not know my story, but it's a pretty crazy story. And there was a period of time where I got kicked out of residential, and I was seeing some doctors outpatient and sort of like living on the streets of Boston and kind of doing my thing. And I started dating, but my job at that time was to engage in life. I'd been through the residential treatment. I'd been through the intensive outpatient. I had done it for a year. There was nothing more to do in office. Now, my OCD was pretty substantial still, but my goal was to live life. That was the only thing to do at this point. So, I met a person, I met a girl, and we started dating, and I took her to therapy, and we had a really meaningful relationship while I was there, until I moved, and we just broke up because we didn't want a long distance relationship. But I think so. By no means does it mean you need to be perfect. You need to be almost all the way clear. I mean, I was definitely somewhere in the middle, but I could have, meaningful conversation. I was working. So, it was a little bit of a trial and error experience, but, again, I had also been through gobs of therapy. Use your name. Gobs of therapy, and the right therapy for many, 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 many months, hundreds of hours. And at that point, it was time to just dive into life and see how it goes. Sally at 7:27 p.m. said, do you have any thoughts about the causes, as it is worldwide and not learned necessarily? I mean, what research has shown is that there's a genetic predisposition. It's somewhere in the prefrontal cortex, the amygdala. some sort of miswiring. They're doing a lot of MRIs and imaging about what's happening and why is it happening. We know that it can be passed down genetically. Typically, if someone has OCD, you can look back at their parents, grandparents have it, and things like that. We know that it can manifest or activate biologically at different periods of time. And there's sort of categories of milestones where this happens, whether it's puberty, college, a trauma, pregnancy. There are very specific periods of time, where moments in life where OCD activates, right? You said something interesting, which is not learned necessarily, and I think you kind of know this by your necessarily, but there's the biological aspect of OCD, which is sort of where it comes on for the first time. And it's chemistry, it's chemically activated. But then behaviorally, we are taught by whoever we're with, and who doesn't understand OCD, those behaviors are reinforced, which is the behavioral sort of learned component, right? So when I started expressing OCD, my parents reinforced it. They taught me, in essence, that compulsions work, and to keep seeking reassurance and enabling. Because every time I did, they gave me exactly what my OCD wanted. So that was, that continued to learn and to reinforce the nurture nature, and I'm sure made it significantly worse. Of course, they didn't know that. So, no one's blaming anybody. You don't know what you don't know. So combination of both. I think there's still a lot to learn, but they definitely have an idea of, causes in terms of how it's passed down and where it generally exists in the brain. But you're right, it doesn't discriminate: age, gender, ethnicity, faith. It doesn't discriminate, and so there's still a lot to learn genetically about where it exists and why it happens. But they're doing some really cool research around that. So I'd like to believe that at some point there'll be some gene therapy that just can remove it, but we're not quite there yet. But good question, Sally. We got 3 minutes. Let me grab one more question, perhaps from someone that hasn't asked yet. Let's see here. Okay, Lynn at 737 asks, why is it so much easier to see how irrational obsession was once you've moved past it? Meanwhile, while you're going through it, it doesn't seem irrational at all. This is such a good question. Okay, so when we're stuck in an obsession, when we're activated and that thought is just fused to our face, we lose what's called insight and objectivity. So our overvalued ideation, meaning the amount that we believe in that thought or fear, significantly increases, and our ability to decipher what is significantly goes down. So our fear, our obsession, no matter how irrational, seems intolerable, irresponsible for ignoring, probably going to happen, not sure, but I'm going to pay attention to it anyway. And there's a chemical activation associated with that. There's an environmental reinforcement of that, and essentially you're like a knight without a sword at a fight, right? You've got your armor, and there's a bunch of knights coming at you with swords, and you've got nothing in your hands. So you have no weapons. You're just, you just feel unarmed, and so that's your lack of objectivity and insight. The body naturally, and this is also what treatment tells us, the body naturally curves on its own from an anxious state. So on its own, your body can't stay at a 10 at a heightened state. It will eventually go down on its own. So, over time, in that moment, it can feel so real. It can feel so scary. How can I not pay attention to this? And a day later, it is such a weird phenomenon. I know we all relate to it, Len. It's like a day later, you're like, well, duh, that was stupid. Of course that wasn't going to happen. That's the most ridiculous thing ever. We're not activated. We've moved past it, so our brain doesn't care anymore in that moment. It's deemed whatever it was not a threat in that moment, and our objectivity and insight has returned. So the logical part of our brain is now the predominant force, right? So it's looking at the situation and going, why was I afraid of that? That's ridiculous. That was like absolutely nothing. All right, well, yeah, learned my lesson. Guess I'm never going to be afraid of that again. Next day, oh my God, right? So it really just comes back to objectivity and insight. And it's this it's this mutually exclusive where if we're even, right, and the OCD ticks up, it pushes the objectivity and insight down to where you have very little of that. So everything seems so real and so scary. And then as that anxiety decreases and the amount of thoughts decrease and you sort of come back to baseline, your objectivity and insight raises back up and looks around and goes, what just happened? That's so weird. So yeah, it's a really weird phenomena. And we feel like we're crazy because we feel like we're tricked every time. Like that time you finally realize, oh, I don't have anything to be afraid of again. And then when it catches you off guard, you're like, what's wrong with me? Did I not learn a lesson there? And that's why we can't treat OCD with logic. You can't treat it logically. You can't say, well, it didn't, right? That's why we have to embrace the uncertainty. That's why the skills and tools are so important, because if logic worked, then when you gain that objectivity back, you would be able to say, that was ridiculous. I'm not going to worry about that again. And then that would stick. The next time you were triggered, you would be able to like, oh, I remember that last time. It was BS. I don't care. That's not what happens, right? So great question, Lynn. I love that. With that, we are out of time. This was awesome. This was such great conversation and great comments and great questions. And thank you. So yeah, there's a bot. We've had some trolls lately. Anyway, sorry about that. Great comments, great questions. This has been a great conversation. So thank you for being here. Some quick end of night housekeeping. As always, I want to thank the IOCDF and Amanda behind the scenes for working her magic and being awesome all around. So tomorrow, 12 p.m. Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific, Research Roundtable with Dr. Bromowitz and Kyle. This is Ketamine 101. So if you've heard about ketamine, you've read about ketamine, you're curious about ketamine and how it relates to OCD, you won't want to miss that. Also, camp registration is open. You can register now for an awesome event created for youth with OCD and their families. The program will include live sessions for parents and guardians and opportunities for fun socialization with other families. You can register at iocdf.org/camp. And as always, this is the giving season. So the holiday season and around a year, your support makes what we do possible, providing help, healing, and hope to the OCD and related disorders community by making the gift to the IOCDF. You can visit their OCD and donate. Visit their OCD. That's what you should do. You can visit their website and donate today. It is tax deductible. Finally, this live stream is one of many. You can see the entire schedule and future of streams at iocdf.org/peace of mind. Also, if you need resources, you can visit iocdf.org or you can email them at info@iocdf.org. Lastly, I said I would get out my email. I always do at the community conversations. If you have questions, comments, things I didn't get to, if you agree, if you disagree, it's a private email. Only I look at it, just Ethan@iocdf.org. Please feel free to email me. I'm actually caught up on my emails, so feel free, and we can continue the conversation. With all of that, thank you for being you, for being here, for being present, for showing up and doing something for yourself and for me and supporting me as well. We all support one another, so I really appreciate you all. Have a beautiful holiday, whatever you observe or you celebrate. We have a couple more live streams scheduled throughout and after Christmas as well, but I don't think we have another community conversation until the beginning of next year. So I will see you all next year in this capacity. And thank you for just making this a wonderful night. So as always, have a wonderful evening. Stay safe, stay vigilant, feel the feels. Don't let OCD off the hook. And we'll see you in a little while. Have a beautiful night. Good night.